Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Legislative Matters Now with M&M. I'm Melissa Southall, Self-Advocate Coordinator for the ARC and People First.
And I'm Morgan Spicer, Special Projects Coordinator with the ARC of the Mid-Ohio Valley. Thank you for joining us. The purpose of this show is to educate self-advocates, and anyone for that matter, on the important topic of legislative advocacy. Now, every month, Melissa and I take a piece of legislation and explain it in an easy-to-understand manner and why it's so important.
We also speak to a self-advocate in our Advocate in Action segment as they talk about how they are using their self-advocacy skills to help themselves or others live a more independent life, just like everyone else. To begin the show, we have a segment titled Who You Gonna Call? Because when you have a question about a legislative issue, you want to make sure you call the right person so you can get the results you want.
It could be a city council member, a state lawmaker, a member of Congress, or an expert in the topic you're concerned about. Let's get to this month's Who You Gonna Call?
On today's Who You Gonna Call, you want to know more about the West Virginia Human Rights Commission. So who you gonna call? A, your city council member. B, your state House of Delegates or state senators. C, your U.S. senator or U.S. Congress member. Or D, a state agency that specializes in what you're looking for. So, what do you think, Melissa?
Well, if human rights is a state agency, I would say D, an expert in the field.
All right, Morgan, what do you think?
I'm going to go for D, state agency.
Correct. A state agency that specializes in what you're looking for. The West Virginia Human Rights Act was enacted in 1961. This was in the very midst of the civil rights movement, only a few years after the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision, which had mandated school desegregation, and several years before the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination nationwide. The 1961 Human Rights Act created the 9-member West Virginia Human Rights Commission to encourage and endeavor to bring about mutual understanding and respect among all racial, religious, and ethnic groups within the state, and to strive to eliminate all discrimination in employment and places of accommodation. The 1961 West Virginia State Code of 135 of the regular session, although the powers and functions of the Commission have been expanded in some important ways over the years, the form of the 9-member Commission and its purposes have remained substantially the same. All of the functions of the original Human Rights Commission, as set out in the 1961 Act, also remain the functions of the West Virginia Human Rights Commission today. The Commission then, as now, is authorized and empowered to work cooperatively with other government agencies and bodies to promote harmony and understanding among racial, religious, and ethnic groups, unless the cooperation of groups in programs and campaigns advancing tolerance and understanding, encourage and conduct studies related to human rights, and make recommendations to the governor and legislature on questions that affect human rights.
To further explain the West Virginia Human Rights Commission and how it operates, our guest is Cameron McKinney, who is the General Counsel for the Commission. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and hi, Melissa and Morgan. I'm happy to be here.
To begin with, we just learned in the previous section that the Human Rights Commission started in 1961. And at that time, the main job was to encourage equal opportunity and to endeavor to bring about mutual understanding. Can you give us an overview of the commission as it stands now and how it has changed since it was originally created?
Sure. Fostering understanding and creating harmony is an important and aspirational mission that still exists today. But this agency has followed the national trend towards a focus on case investigations and processing. An administrative agency like ours, for instance, is supposed to be able to process a case faster, cheaper, and easier, especially for the victim of discrimination, as opposed to civil litigation in the court system. I would say that three main changes mark the evolution to the modern agency that the Human Rights Commission is today. Number one, like I said, there was a focus on cases. And so the focus, the resources, and the processing is mainly towards investigation and litigation of cases. There was a 1984 landmark decision by the West Virginia Supreme Court in a case called Edith Allen versus the Human Rights Commission, where the Human Rights Commission just wasn't processing cases in a timely manner. The folks who filed this case with the Supreme Court had cases that had been pending sometimes for 5, 6, or 7 years. And the Supreme Court said that the Human Rights Commission has a duty to hold trials of these cases where we find probable cause and issue decisions promptly. That we must employ a full-time judge called an administrative law judge, at least one, to be available to make decisions on discrimination cases, and that the West Virginia Attorney General has an obligation to provide free legal services to the commission and to the victims of discrimination. So the shift towards actual efficient and quick processing of cases is a big change. The other big change, or a second big change, is federal involvement. Over the decades, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has gotten deeply involved with state, local, and tribal programs, and the federal agency Housing and Urban Development has gotten deeply involved with state and local agencies. And what they are able to provide is expertise, training, and quality standards for how we're supposed to handle cases. And they also provide funding. And for the victims of discrimination, they provide that they preserve federal rights and state rights simultaneously. And an agency like the EEOC can look at all this data from all the different states and local agencies and pinpoint problems that are occurring across the nation and focus on remedying those problems. And then the third major change, I would say, that brings us up to date is the prevalence of settlement and mediation. It's pretty rare now for our judge to have to issue a final decision, even though we still find probable cause in cases, just as we always have. A judge's decision is pretty rare because mediation has become such a popular avenue to get cases resolved before they go to trial.
Well, there are many issues that people have. What are the three main areas that the Human Rights Commission deals with?
Well, we have jurisdiction over three areas of life, and that is where you work. We handle cases involving employment discrimination. Where you live, we handle cases involving housing discrimination. And then where you spend your money and where you spend your time. And that's places of public accommodation. And so those are the three areas where we have jurisdiction to do investigations and issue decisions. It does not involve other issues that are human rights issues, but they're not within our jurisdiction. For instance, the conduct of jails and prisons, police conduct, the political conflicts. It's only employment, housing, and places of public accommodation where we have jurisdiction to investigate.
Let's go through those one at a time in a little more detail. Let's begin with how the commission helps people with employment issues.
Well, employment discrimination it could be based on race, religion, color, national origin, ancestry, sex, age, or disability. And usually that would mean it can include I wasn't hired or I wasn't promoted, or that I was fired or I was selected for layoff because of one of the characteristics on that list, like sex, age, or disability. But it can also involve an employer's obligation to provide reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. And that is to allow a person with a disability to be and remain employed. And another type of employment case that is pretty common, regrettably, is a case of hostile environment or harassment that is so severe or pervasive based on one of the protected characteristics like sex or disability or age, so that it creates a hostile environment. And then there can also be cases involving equal pay for equal work for men and women, or equal treatment of all employees based on one of the protected characteristics.
Let's talk about housing. We know lots of people have concerns about housing. What kind of issues do people have, and how can the commission help?
Well, again, housing can include a landlord who won't rent to someone, or a seller who won't sell to someone, or even a bank who won't lend to someone because of race or sex or disability, one of the protected characteristics. An important distinguishment between housing and employment is that age is not a protected characteristic when it comes to housing discrimination, but familial status is. Landlords and sellers and banks are not allowed to discriminate in housing provisions on the basis of familial status. And that basically means having children or trying to have children. There are some landlords who do not want kids in their apartment building. And so it could involve those things, but it can also, again, involve a landlord's obligation to provide reasonable accommodations or reasonable modifications to an apartment to allow a person with disabilities to use and enjoy that apartment. Okay. And not just accommodations or modifications, but also the design and construction of housing units has to have 7 aspects of accessible design. And that includes, that there has to be a path that is usable by a wheelchair. There has to be a doorway that's usable by a wheelchair. The environmental controls have to be reached from a wheelchair. There should be lever type of door handles instead of round knobs for people who have disabilities that affect their grip strength. And so those are, and then also there can be cases of hostile environment and harassment by a landlord. And sadly, we see some cases where a tenant may be pressured for sexual favors when she is a little bit short on the rent or something like that. And so we do have several different kinds of housing cases. And ironically, lately, one of the most common types of complaints is from a person with a disability who has a treating professional who says that person would benefit from owning a support animal, an emotional support animal, but landlord doesn't allow pets. But the landlord it has to consider this to be not a pet, but more like a prescription. And so the person whose treatment provider says they would benefit from owning an emotional support animal has the right to have that animal in their apartment, even if the landlord doesn't allow pets.
We spoke in a previous program with Kim Knuckles, who is the WV ADA coordinator, who said public access is a major issue. How does the commission help with those concerns?
Well, like I said, the third area where we have jurisdiction are places of public accommodation. And those are your restaurants, your theaters, your transportation, stores, and even schools and courthouses. And the law arises from the 1960 desegregation era, where most public facilities were segregated on the lines of race. But with the arrival of the ADA in 1990, accessibility for persons with disabilities has become a legal requirement. And so we kind of bootstrap that onto the Human Rights Act. And of course, if someone can't access the building, then they are being denied service of that place of public accommodation. And so, of course, this all, by the way, we still see those kind of racial discrimination cases where people say, we don't serve your kind here, or you're not welcome here. But I would say the majority of public accommodation cases are about accessibility for persons with disabilities. This includes accessible parking, ramps and doors and bathrooms. There is actually a lawyer in West Virginia who uses a motor wheelchair who has probably filed a dozen or 15 complaints whenever he's out on the road and can't use the bathroom at a convenience store, that he file a complaint against that convenience store and make them fix their bathroom.
Are there more calls about housing versus employment? Talk about the typical call and how many calls the commission gets.
The vast majority of our calls and our cases are employment cases. For instance, last year, during the fiscal year, we closed 150 employment cases, whereas we had less than 30 housing cases and less than 30 public accommodation cases. So it's like a ratio of 5 to 1, mostly our employment cases. And the typical caller feels strongly that they have been wronged and that their protected characteristics such as race, sex, disability, or age was a factor in the wrong that they suffered. And so we basically welcome all of those allegations and we investigate them. And what we can always get for the person who filed a complaint is an answer, which sometimes you can't get an answer out of your employer or your landlord. But we can at least get the employer or the landlord to put down in writing their version of events and why whatever happened. But our staff is almost entirely dedicated to investigating these allegations, and we do a pretty good job with the help of our federal partners that I mentioned earlier of sorting through the cases quickly and coming up with a determination of probable cause or no probable cause. And where we find probable cause, we pass the cases on to the administrative law judge, where the attorney general helps the victim of discrimination. I'm actually sitting in the judge's chair right now at the Human Rights Commission. But like I said, it's rare that the judge has to issue a decision because of mediation and the efforts to get most cases resolved by settlement agreement.
Is there anything that you would like to add?
I've been working for the Human Rights Commission for over 7 years now, and I have learned that there are all kinds of instances of discrimination or where someone may feel like they were treated wrongly, but they don't know about the Human Rights Commission. And so I would welcome anyone who has a group that advocates for a certain protected group to let all of your clients and audiences know that the Human Rights Commission is available. It's a relatively easy process to get started. You don't have to have a lawyer, and we will treat you kindly, even if we can't find the evidence to support your discrimination allegation. But if we do find the evidence to support a discrimination claim, we have an efficient and relatively quick system for bringing that case to a resolution.
Now, if any of our advocates have a question or concern, what is the best way to get a hold of you guys?
You can use the internet or you can use telephone. If you go to our website, which is hrc.wv.gov, you can find information about the commission, but you can also find the forms for the 3 types of cases that we take: employment, housing, and public accommodation. And all you have to do is fill out that form and mail it in. If you don't use the internet or don't have access, you can call us. We have a toll-free number, which is 888-676-5546. And if you tell the receptionist that you're interested in exploring a complaint, the receptionist will connect you to an investigator to talk about it more, and they will mail you one of the forms to complete and send it in. And that's all you have to do to get started.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for talking with us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure as well. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember, if you have a legislative issue you would like Melissa and I to explore further, or you want to be featured in a future Advocate in Action segment, let us know. You can call the office at 304-422-3151, and you may also email us as well. My email address is morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org.
I can be reached at melissa.southall@peoplefirstwv.org. We would love to hear from you and have you as a future guest on the show. Today, our advocate in action is Steve Wiseman. Steve is the outgoing director of West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council, and he announced he is retiring. If you are not aware, People First is funded by the council. Steve was on the show last year as an expert on legislation. This time, we wanted to find out about his experiences as advocate.
Thank you, Steve, for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you all for having me here. I really appreciate the show and what you all are doing, and I'm just glad to be contributing in a little way that I do.
Now, you've been in this business for many years. Talk about how you got involved in advocacy.
Well, my paid career started in 1973, so it's been 49 years and coming up on 50th year of working in the field of developmental disabilities. I started my paid work at the Washington County Board of Developmental Disabilities over in Marietta and Washington County, Ohio, and came right out of graduate school and right into that situation. And they were looking for somebody to serve people in their homes who were excluded from even the segregated programs, such as the school and workshop. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great challenge. I may have had some schooling in that sort of thing, but I really knew that I would learn on the job, and it certainly worked out that way. So I've gone from that to many other positions, many other jobs and opportunities.
So, what was it like when you began working in that field, and then what did you hope would happen over the years?
Wow, that's a really good question. You're taxing my memory, but I think some things are pretty fresh still. There was a lot of segregation. Certainly where I worked, the programs were all segregated. People with developmental and other disabilities were taught together in the same school. If they went to the day program, sheltered workshop, they all did that with people that they went to school with. And at that time when I started, there was very little residential services in the community. Matter of fact, there was none in big parts of Ohio. A lot of people, unfortunately, lived in the large state institutions. And when I started there, each area of that state, Ohio, and it had a big regional state institution in Washington County, which is right across from Parkersburg, and I lived in Williamstown actually at the time. The regional institution was in Gallipolis, the Gallia County. It was the Gallipolis Institution. Had different names, but it was the Gallipolis State Institution. And I believe there were 3,200 people lived there. And that was not the largest state institution for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Ohio. And there were lots of them. So that speaks volumes, as they say, about how people were generally treated by the human service system.
So throughout your different experiences, how did you come to work at the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council? And then when you first got there, what did you hope to accomplish?
Well, to back up, what I left my first place, I ended up being the superintendent. But so for 9 years, I was at the Washington County programs. I had envisioned then, I think maybe you'd asked me this earlier, I had envisioned that people would become more, the people that we served would become more integrated into the community as whole. A lot of people lived on farms, a lot of people lived in town, but during the daytime, I advocated for people to go to schools that were closer to their home. And if not that, if they were still bused into Marietta, for example, we would find schools and classes that were age appropriate for the people with modifications. And also the people who worked at the workshop, I wanted to get them all into some kind of typical employment around. There's a lot of business and industry around at that time. And neither of those things happened. And so ultimately, the board and I agreed that I would leave because we were just on different paths. And as people might know, in that case, and probably a lot of other cases, that we built some new expensive buildings that replaced dilapidated ones, old ones that were falling apart and were very unhealthy places with asbestos and everything. So it was a big improvement in that way. But at the same time, it pretty much seemed to assure that we were going to always be segregated in the approaches. So that's why I left in 82. And I came to West Virginia because I've always lived in West Virginia. Grew up here and all my family's been here for generations. But was lucky to get the job with the Medley Project, which was a new effort in West Virginia to get people out of state institutions and get them set up in community life, a real community life. And so it was just a lucky thing that I got to be the director of that project and worked on the closure of the state institutions and became the director for the Division of Developmental Disabilities in the state. And that was really over the services that were delivered across the state. Did that for several years, and then came up to the opening at the Developmental Disabilities Council, and this was right after the last state institution, Cole Anderson Center, closed in 1998, and so we were working very hard to help people get real lives and real community. You know, people who had lived there or people who would go there, children and adults, if it was there, you know. So luckily, the state saw the light finally, and we closed the facilities, Greenberg Center and Cole Anderson being the last two. So after that, I was already on the council, the Developmental Disabilities Council, as a member from the agency as when I worked in the Medley Project. So they had created a position actually on the council for the Medley Project to be represented there. I did that. And so I was on there from the late 1980s. And the opportunity came open when a previous director left. And after some conversations, I was kind of encouraged to join on. So I became the director in 1999. I knew that we had done a lot of good work because I'd worked with the council and seen it fairly firsthand for a long time, but I knew that we could do so much more. And frankly, after retiring, I'll see that there's plenty more to be done that we did not get accomplished or things that are coming up. There's still a great strides forward in West Virginia. I have to be fairly proud, not just of me, but of the work that a lot of people and a lot of families and a lot of people with developmental disabilities have done to improve life here. But we have so far to go. It's just a lot of challenges to getting people to have typical lives in typical communities. We're not asking too much. We're actually demanding people's rights, and more importantly, people's human rights. So to the American dream, right? And that's what we're all shooting for.
Are there any stories that you have about times that you've spoke up for self-advocates and it didn't work out the way you wanted it to?
Wow, that really it's an easy question, easy answers, but it's also tough. There are just so many experiences that you have with people. I'm taken back to a very early experience, and I'll just share an early one. Okay, I was talking about people living in the state institutions, and my task. Nobody told me to. Nobody really was talking about trying to get people out of the state institutions. I just said, "Well, wait a minute. All the citizens in our county don't live in our county. Let's go out and check out the people who don't and live in these state institutions." And that was pretty unique, and nobody had ever done that before. I was surprised to find out. So when I went to down and I visited everybody, I think there were at that time, I think there were 60 people maybe from Washington County who lived in the state institutions. So I went out and visited them all, and one person struck me. He was very, he could talk and sit and have a conversation and tell me all about life there and things. And it was very insightful. You know, when you go to school, you go to college, nobody teaches you those things. Things like that, real insight needs to come from people themselves who are actually experiencing these things, and sometimes people who are their closest allies, like their family. And that's where you really get an education, and it helps shape your thoughts about what can I do to help. And so this one person, his name is Everett, and worked with him over a period of time, and helped him come out of the state institution. It was the first person I ever heard of. Nobody there had ever heard of anybody being helped. Maybe they had, but nobody in the agency knew about it. Helped Everett come to Washington County. I thought, and I was thinking, he has all the capacity, all the abilities. He just is in the wrong place, And so got him and set him up, got him supported back home, very poorly, I'll say. We didn't really give a lot of support, but got him in the day program with other adults. And he was didn't do too well. He was getting depressed, actually, and things didn't work out so well. And I didn't understand that. I thought, well, he'd be just tickled to death. I mean, anybody would, to get out of that big place and living here and all that. Well, I didn't really understand that he had plenty of status back where he was in the institution. He was, everybody knew him, and he did all kinds of stuff at the institution that gave him a role of being credible and everything. He came to the shelter workshop. He didn't know how to do a lot of things that people with much more impairment already knew. And he was feeling very bad about himself and about situation. And I had to work a long time to try to talk him into staying. And he ended up going back to the institution. Back then you could. If you didn't like it, you could just go back. And so he went back, and I went back. I thought, what's going on here? I don't understand. So I learned a lot. Went back. We did it differently the next time. I asked him what he wanted to do. I just assumed he would be really happy with all this, and it would work out, like a fairy tale. No, it's not people's lives, because we really didn't, and talked him into it. I didn't ask him what he wanted. Sat down and did that a few times and listened to him and got him back out. First person, got him an apartment, got him, and supported him more when he went to be socially, to learn actually how to be social with people that he didn't have in the real world, you see, even at the shelter workshop. He became successful. He married one of the other people that went to the shelter workshop. They had their own life and apartment, and family was supportive this time, and so forth and so on. And he stayed out. And I think it was not something that was great that I did. The thing that he did for me far exceeded it in my mind, because he taught me a lesson and many lessons about how I can't be so sure that I know what the answers are for people. I've got to hear from people and help them then follow their dreams. And so that was just something that stuck with me all these years. And that was back in 1970s. So it's made a big impact and helped me every day.
So what's the greatest change that you've seen in how people with disabilities are able to live and work in their community?
Well, it's hard to come down with what is the greatest change. In the time span that I've worked, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, right? And the IDEA, it used to be called 94-142, which is the public school law changed that included people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to a much more degree, and made accommodations. At least the rules changed, the laws changed. Very slow progress, and today we find we have incredible challenges and things that we thought as people working in the field, and maybe as advocates and family members, we thought we already accomplished that. We could check that off. Oh, good, we've done that. Now we have that. Well, that's unfortunately not the case. It's just you have to keep working it all the time.
What do you say to keep people moving forward? Because advocates do get discouraged from time to time. So how do we encourage advocates to move forward when those situations arise?
I don't have a relative who gets services because they have an intellectual disability. But by the way, I've had the good fortune surrounding myself with people who do. And it's a great combination. And so I think that working in partnership, and also I wanted to say something about self-advocacy, which is a good thing for sure, to advocate for things that you shouldn't take for granted. But the higher idea is to be an advocate for people who are not valued in our society, people across the spectrum, people maybe with who you've gone to school with, who you maybe live with. But it speaks to the broader question about what you're going to do to help yourself and others. Because none of us are an island. None of us can just live on our own. We need relationships with other people. And I'm reminded here of a good friend and council member now, and an active People First person, and that's Shar Roth, who is to me one of the. I'll just do a shout out to her and say she's a person who I've always been impressed with, who is helping others, never asking for something for herself in my presence, but has been just seeing herself as somebody who needs to help other people. And through that, I find, like Shar, you help yourself.
Anything that you would like to add?
I think that there'll be plenty of people who follow me, and meaning after I'm gone, and are going to do great things. And I have a vision of many better things that will happen in the years to come. I try to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. It's going to take a lot of work, but I am highly confident that we are going to have a lot of great things here at the DD Council. And much of that has to do with our partnerships with other people, our partnerships with other groups. We need more energy because the pandemic, particularly over the last couple of years, has drained a lot of our energy collectively. We're going to get it back. I'm sure, and I think we'll work hard to do that. I think we have some things at the DD Council with some of the people that work here now and will work in the future, and our council members that I'm just so encouraged, and I hope to be somehow a part of that. I'm not sure how, but if it's just a cheerleader, I want to do that.
Thank you so much, Steve Wiseman, for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been great working with you all. I really, really appreciate our self-advocacy efforts here in West Virginia. I'm happy to have been a small part of that over the years.
Remember, if you would like to be featured on a future segment of Advocate in Action and are using your self-advocacy skills in your life or the lives around you, we would love to have you on the show. You can call the ARC at 304-422-3151 or email me and Melissa directly. My email address is morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org.
And mine is melissa.southall@peoplefirstwv.org. We would love to have you on the show. With that, we are out of time for this month's episode. We would like to thank Cameron McKinney from the Human Rights Commission and our Advocate in Action, Steve Wiseman, for joining us for this month's program.
We hope you have a good Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see you all next month. Until next time, advocacy matters.
And so do you. See you next time.